Oh my god.
Metro City, a well-known crime capital, has been ruled by violence and death for many years.
Hello and welcome back everyone. A few years ago I done a video on Final Fight. It was an early video of mine, and as I go back and watch it over I do cringe a little as I hear my nerves jangling away when I talk. But in those early days I mostly made videos on games I really enjoyed and games I had played or owned in my childhood. The video was in two sections, with the arcade first and the Super Famicom version after. In that video I waxed lyrical about what a great game it was in the arcade, and even though the Super Famicom version was missing quite a bit, I stood up to be counted and defended Final Fight on the console. To me, it was an imperfect game, but it was still massively enjoyable and had given me a lot of good memories during my childhood years. So now I find myself making a video about Final Fight on the Mega CD. But this only came about as I played a pre-release version of the homebrew Final Fight MD, and so I wanted to compare that to the Mega CD one. And I have to tell you, I never played Final Fight CD when I was younger. I did see it and a Mega CD for sale second hand sometime in summer 1994 I think. And as much as I enjoyed Final Fight, and as much as the appeal of having a 2-player go of it at home was certainly enticing, I decided against it. Largely in part to Streets of Rage 2, which was simply outstanding. But it had always been lurking in the back of my mind, that question, what was it like? And when I discovered Megadrive emulators in 1997, Final Fight CD was one of the very first games I tried to download. I say tried, as have you ever tried downloading a file larger than 10 megabytes on dial-up? It was pretty difficult. But I did get there in the end. But rather than talk about that moment in particular, I will be as honest as I can be about my impressions of Final Fight CD. As soon as you fire up the CD, you are presented with a typical CD-based game from the early 1990s. That is to say, you get an overextended intro, loads of super clear speech, and a CD quality soundtrack. And once you skip past all of that and start the game, you are presented with the familiar character select screen from the arcade. And in 1993, this would have probably made me all giddy, but focus Stevie, focus. And from the off, the improvements over the Nintendo release are obvious. The intro to the level, the walking between the stages, the 2-player mode, all of the issues or complaints about the Nintendo release are gone and replaced with the original missing content. And one would simply have to concede that Capcom done a better job of this port than they did with the Nintendo one. The visuals are obviously downgraded from the arcade original, and the colours seem to be way off as well. The colour of Hagar's trousers in particular seem more olive than usual. And it's not just the colours that are way off. Some of the sprite quality is rough around the edges to say the least. It's not blocky imagery or anything, but something seems awry with these sprites. More pixelated than pristine, I would say. And the animation seems a little off as well. But it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's actually pretty good, but again, it just seems off a little. But all of the iconic backgrounds and levels from the arcade are there. Even the industrial level, which was missing from the Nintendo version, is there, and it looks pretty good in my opinion. It's worth mentioning as well that the general opinion among gamers of the off-colour palette of this game was the same, and years later a hack was released which improved the colours of the CD version to make it closer to the arcade original, and I think it does a pretty good job. But the off colours would have been far lower down my list of things to fix in this game, I can tell you. The sound is superb in this game. All of the arcade sounds of punches, slams and grunts and groans are all there, and they all sound pretty close to the arcade, which is what I would have expected anyway. But it's the CD quality soundtrack that's a bit Marmite. The tunes have been remastered into this kind of bossa nova or samba sound derivative, and I have to say, I have nothing bad to say about the overall quality, as it's very good. But I do have issues with the tunes now, as they sound so out of place, and it's so noticeable on my favourite level in Final Fight, Bay Area. In the arcade and the Super NES, the tunes used in this level just kept you pounding the buttons more and more, and it seemed to crescendo with the action on screen. But on the CD version it's less button bashing and more anal pumping. It sounds like a tune from an American porn movie. You know, those kind that have scripts and stories. Or maybe you don't know, and in which case, it's just me. The other thing with the soundtrack is this. In the early days of CD-ROM video games, the music was recorded as a track on the CD and was just lifted or requested like a digital jukebox and played. And when the track ends, you get silence, as the CD seeks out the track again and replays it. And I found that to be quite annoying, but again, that's just me. The playability on the CD version is great. It's just like the arcade and even the Nintendo version. Final Fight is a great game, and this port is also pretty good. The enemy placement, the enemy movement, which I will also come back to later in this video, it's all great too. Just like the arcade. But the biggest difference between this and the Nintendo port is the amount of enemies on the screen. The Nintendo one could only accommodate 3 enemies at once, but on the Mega CD I think it's 5. It's certainly more than the Nintendo one. But there is one flaw with the gameplay, and it's a biggie, and that's the responsiveness of the controls. And I have to be honest, as I have never played this on the actual Mega CD before, so this complaint may just be an emulation thing, but I found the controls to be unresponsive an awful lot in the game, and it's obvious when punching rapidly. I played this port with a Hori fighting stick with rapid fire engaged, and when punching, even at 20 times a second, the punching was quite slow, but yet on the arcade and even the Nintendo port, the punching is quicker, far closer to 20 times a second than the CD version. but I also found the direction change sluggish, and when going in for a flurry and you want to throw the enemy behind you, I was always mistiming it, but never had that issue with the arcade one on MAME or the Nintendo port. But even with those niggles aside, there is no denying that Final Fight CD is a good port. But the biggest problem for it in those days was the cost. Why would you want to pay £300 for a Mega CD and then £40 for the game when you could pay £40 for Streets of Rage 2 and get a better game, in my opinion? And obviously, I wasn't the only person who was thinking along those lines, as some years later, Final Fight fans and Megadrive fans have got together and made a homebrew version of the game. But for what reason? Now then, I am not the biggest fan of homebrew games. I don't criticise anyone's application or drive when it comes to creating homebrew versions of games. I find them to be an interesting endeavour, an exercise in seeing what was possible. And in fact, when I played the homebrew version of Golden Axe in the Neo Geo, I even said it was a good port, but it was obvious that the Neo Geo would be able to handle it, and there are easier ways to play an accurate port of Golden Axe these days. And I will be honest, when I kept seeing videos on YouTube of Final Fight MD, I kept asking myself, yeah, it looks good, but do we really need another way to play Final Fight? And I was also preparing myself for the onslaught of Megadrive owners who would no doubt compare it to the Nintendo version and then slight that version. But I mean, come on, really? I guess some rivalries never die. Anyway, for now, let's focus on the Mega Drive version of Final Fight. And let's go into the options. Yes, the options. Something that was missing from the Nintendo one. You had to use a button sheet to get the menu. And what did you get? This sad effort. You can select level and boss difficulty, number of lives, and when you get a bonus. Oh, and you can listen to the music. But this is the best bit. You can select extra joy. It's no bad thing, I suppose. The world is a dreary place right now, and I think everyone could use a little joy in their lives. Now let's have a look at the Mega Drive one. You can select auto fire, which I do recommend. You can select difficulty, amount of lives, bonus intervals, and listen to the music. But you also get extra options, which allows for a whole ton of options to be set, juggling, extra moves, 60 frames per second, and a whole load more. And this menu screen really does put the Nintendo one to shame, but I will come back to some other options later. When you start the game, you get the same 3-character select screen as the arcade and the CD version, and then it's off to the races. And look, you even get the same barrel intro as the arcade. And the first thing that hits you is that the sprites are all a tiny bit smaller, but the look of them is outstanding. The colour palette of the Megadrive as well seems to have been replaced with a far larger palette, as the colours in this version look simply glorious. It really is very impressive indeed. The animation looks very much improved over the CD version as well. In fact, let's do a comparison of the three heroes, shall we, across the arcade, Nintendo CD and Mega Drive versions. And while the arcade is obviously the standout here, the animation on the Mega Drive version looks excellent. And in my opinion, it looks far better than the CD and the Nintendo versions. And it's not just for one character. All of them look brilliant. I'm impressed. I really am. There is one small thing though I have to add, and it's not really a complaint, but it's more of an observation. When you look at Cody, he has this dark outline around him, and this reminds me of Capcom sprites pre-CPS era, like you would see in Bionic Commando. And it's not just Cody, it sometimes appears on Slash as well. In fact, I would say this Slash sprite is the worst looking sprite in the game, but he still doesn't look terrible. The bosses look superb as well. This port really has managed to make them look huge, while still keeping the sprites small. But each of them look amazing. The backgrounds all look brilliant as well. I thought that when this homebrew was being made, the backgrounds would just have been lifted straight from the CD one. But it looks like they have been redrawn in many places, and lifted from the arcade and others. You do have to keep pinching yourself here to remind you, it's playing on Mega Drive hardware. This port is absolutely fantastic. And I have to admit something else here as well. When I was a young lad in 1990 and I had a Mega Drive at home, I would go into Joker's Amusements in Paisley and play this in the arcade with a mate every Saturday. And one time when I had to get change, I asked him to pause it, simply because I was used to arcade quality games at home in the Mega Drive. And in my mind, I had always envisioned Final Fight would make it onto the Mega Drive. But even this version has surpassed what I envisioned it would look like. The sound is quite possibly where this game could come a cropper, but unbelievably, and still rather unsurprisingly now, the sound is excellent in this game. The tunes are more faithful to the arcade than the CD version, but even with a limited amount of sound channels on the Mega Drive, the 6 channels are given a serious workout, and you hear the music, screams, thumps and bangs and bonus jingles all at the same time. It really is quite amazing what has been achieved here. Now, by far my favourite part of any game is the playability. And this Mega Drive version of Final Fight plays like, well, Final Fight. With one exception. And I was going to cover this off in the CD one, but decided to mention it later for a reason. When you play Final Fight in the arcade or on the Nintendo or even the CD version, you can easily manipulate the enemies to get them in a line and then you just get tore right into them. And that's the key to success in Final Fight. Making a load of enemies just one enemy and keeping them all on the one side of the screen. Well, in the Mega Drive version, that's more of a challenge. You see, the enemy movement here seems to have better AI than previous versions, and the enemies in this version do a better job of flanking you, and they don't always just simply walk into your already flying fists. They move around and in turn force you to move around. And so the normal approach of just throwing them into the one side of the screen is much harder to pull off here. And I did find it annoying, but I also found it a good way to up the challenge level in the game. And the game is quite a challenge. I used several lives to beat it. My days of trying to best games in 1 credit or 1 life are over. Now I play them simply for fun. But this game packed a decent challenge, even on easy, and a complete playthrough takes about an hour or so. And something else that sets Final Fight apart from other scrolling beat-em-ups was that the levels just seemed to get longer and longer. Like, you could get to the industrial area after 12 minutes and feel like you're on course for some kind of time record. But it takes almost 50 minutes to play the last 3 levels as they just get longer and longer. But it's one of the things that makes Final Fight a brilliant game. And this port adds even more than that. You see, there are achievements to be gained in the game that unlock extra options in the menu, and then you can play the time attack mode akin to the CD version, which I didn't mention anything about. And you can also do a boss gauntlet, which I always despise in game, but as a bonus mode, it's awesome. And you can even do just the bonus screens if you want. But the extra goodness doesn't stop there. Oh no. You can even play a mega mode of the game, which has simultaneous 3-player mode. And you can select Maki from Final Fight 2 from the Super NES as one of the playable characters. How good is that? I mean, how good is that? And that brings me on to my next question. How good is this game? Well, I can say it's bloody brilliant. It really is. Playing this game for this video, I never felt like I was playing a homebrew. It felt like an official release. Yeah, alright, it's got bugs in places. There is some sprite flicker and some slowdown. But this is an incomplete version of the game, and it still plays amazingly well. It's by far the best port of Final Fight to the home machines I have ever played. What Mauro, Xavier and the rest of the devs has done is nothing short of spectacular. The full arcade Final Fight game, a 3-player mode, extra characters, huge amounts of options, a good bonus reward scheme that guarantees repeated playthroughs, and all of this on a 32 megabit cartridge, a 4 megabyte cartridge. It is absolutely amazing, and I cannot heap enough praise onto it. I really can't. Earlier in this video, I said I kept asking myself, yeah, it looks good, but do we really need another way to play Final Fight? Well, the answer was not really. And we don't need another way to play Final Fight anymore, as this one tops all of the home ports. This is the best home port of Final Fight by a country mile. And while I will still be a cynic when it comes to homebrew games, I will always be giving them a look from now on. This homebrew version of Final Fight didn't just look to create a port of Final Fight, it offers so much more to the player, and that alone is worth it. That alone makes this a very special version of Final Fight, and if you can, I suggest you download it for yourself and give it a play. And there is nothing left for me to say other than a massive thank you to the guys at CFX for creating what is quite simply the best home port of Final Fight I have ever played in my life. Thank you so much. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.